This is Stephen McNallen, broadcasting from the Folkish Federation space platform Wernher von Braun, currently loitering in the rings of Saturn. To all our folk in the occupied territories of Earth, another episode of Gods, Folk, and Destiny. Whose gods? Our gods and goddesses, the holy powers of the North, led by Odin and Frigga. Whose folk? Our folk, born of ancient Hyperborea, now spanning the globe with eyes on the stars. Whose destiny? Our destiny, which we will win by hard work and mighty deeds. Honor, sovereignty, well-being, and the existence of our people forever. So shall it be. Tonight we've just had a heck of a time just getting here. My camera is possessed, and I don't know any great Nordic spells offhand for exorcism, because I don't think we do it quite like that. But just kidding. But really, it's beyond mechanics. It's like four-dimensional mechanics and stuff, man. But anyway, we did it. Punched the right button somehow. Guess just got lucky. You punch enough buttons, something's got to happen, right? So it did, and here we are. And it's been really an interesting time since I talked with you guys last time. Sheila and I took a few days up the coast to a very interesting little conference, sort of a more political and spiritual, but actually with strong spiritual overtones. And I was there largely representing the spiritual input on that. It was very productive, very well organized, awesome people, and a lot of interesting and strange things happened actually after the event. And I'm going to describe that in just a moment because it's pertinent to my topic for tonight. Tonight, Wotan, Jung, and the awakening of our folk. A close look at how Wotan has manifested in history and how we can invoke his might and wisdom in the world today, and how you can take part in this great battle. But first, you know what's coming next. The 4 things you need to do to give me some support here. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Spread the word. We got to be changing the world, because that's the reason I breathe, and so that I can make a difference. And I plan on breathing for a long time, but let's get it done. So last time we were here, I talked about, it's been a couple of weeks back. I told you about strange coincidences that had occurred when I went down to a little place up in the Sierra foothills here and did a wedding. And it's gotten weirder and weirder. Just a little bit of a reminder. Some of this I've mentioned before, but I'm just going to do a quick recap on it. We went down to the little town in question, and we did the wedding, and it was awesome. But there's the other things that happened that just blew me out of the water. First of all, I ran into the team of tree trimming Ausatruer. Try saying that rapidly 3 times. The guy who runs the tree trimming crew that bids on utility projects. They all wear hammers. They all do bloat. They all are part of this thing of ours. Hours later, I was running into the couple in the motel breakfast room where the guy pulled out his hammer. Later that day, I ran into the waiter in the restaurant who had runes tattooed on the inside of his arm, and none of those were connected to the wedding. They were all completely separate events, and we looked at the odds on that, and it turned out to be something like 1 in a million that all 3 of those things would happen. But it hasn't stopped. Went up the coast to this conference, came home. On the way home, I'm in the airport up there, and hey, here comes one of the people who was actually at the conference. And the chances of that are not really huge, I mean, that happens to me very occasionally, like once ever in all my years of flying and back and forth across the country and around the world, that I run into someone who had that connection with just a matter of hours before, and bang, there it was. So, we exchanged information and, made promises to get together at some point. And that was kind of cool. But there was more. As we were getting on the plane, stewardesses stopped us for just a moment, looked at us, and they said, "What are those? What are those things that you and your wife are wearing?" We replied, "Thor's hammers." They were fascinated. They were really curious about that. So we, slipped them some information before we left. So all of this stuff, it sounds insignificant, but if you start looking at the coincidences, the way this stuff just keeps building and building. Oh, I forgot to mention, on flying out of Sacramento, we see a guy going up the escalator with a black shirt on and a big Thor's hammer on the back of it. It happens to us everywhere we go. Now, I don't think it's just us. I think that subtle changes are happening out there. And it's not such a clear cause and effect kind of relationship. It is, quote, coincidences. It is synchronicities. It is with a Y. And it's really kind of a very good thing. There's a lot of positive changes happening in American culture right now. I know that's kind of hard to believe. You turn on the news and there's more about the Trump impeachment, and there's more about this disaster and that disaster, and more about what this politician says about something else, and more about some other outrage in the sphere of culture where just plain stupidity once again triumphs. It seems to be the thing that we focus on. But if we get our attention off of that, other things are going on. And that's what Sheila and I in particular have been experiencing in the recent days. Yes, please. See, that's probably somebody calling and offering a tremendous interview somewhere so that I can reach millions and millions of people. It's my fans. They can't stay away. Oh, it's the bill collector? Oh well, whatever. Hey, we got to shoot for the best that's in us. Let me regroup here a little bit, guys. This is really strangeness. It's not just stuff that happens to Sheila and I. And I bet that a lot of you, if you can think about it, have had weird things like that happening to you as well. Again, weird with a Y. It's the larger culture as well. We've talked about that a little bit in the past, but things like the Vikings series could not have happened 10 or 15 years ago. Game of Thrones, very popular, not Vikings or Norse per se, but it's got that Hyperborean Nordic sort of atmosphere to it. That would not have been a thing a couple of decades ago. Thor's hammers. Yeah, you'd occasionally see one. Now you see them everywhere, at least I do, and I don't think it's just selective perception. There are more of them out there. I run into people everywhere. Celtic fairs, people in stores, people in the streets, people in cafes. People are wearing Thor's hammers. People are involved with runes. People are watching stuff about Vikings and Nordic culture and so forth. It seems to be everywhere we look. And I think this is a sign of an awakening. It's just the beginning. It's not where we need to be, but gradually I can see this happening. And it kind of corresponds to some of the political changes that we're seeing out there, that at least our quote, our side, people who understand the concept of folk are becoming more and more prominent, more and more accepted in some ways, making more and more progress, giving our input into the larger social and political scene. This is a happening thing. The curve is going upwards. It's that whole exponential curve thing, When I got my first Thor's hammer, it was down over here. Thor, who's he? And then the years go by, and then it's like this, and then it's like this, and then it's like this, and now it's just absolutely a really different change. So what's that all about? Clearly, something is bubbling in the collective unconscious of the Northern Europeans, and it's just the beginning. The question then becomes, how do we keep it going, and how do we make it go faster? And some may say, well, we don't need to make it go faster, dude. It's happening, just let it be. But, I'm not that kind of a guy, because I like to affect the circumstances that are impinging on me. I want to know, what can we do to accelerate this? If you're going to be an accelerationist, be this kind of accelerationist at least, not the kind that wants to, in the long run, do a lot of damage to what it is we're trying to accomplish. I know, so I'm going to get some comments on that, and that's okay. Fine, disagree with me. But we need to accelerate the change in consciousness. We need to accelerate the spiritual things that are happening. And this will lead ultimately to the social and political effects that we want. There's no easy way to do it. There's no magic button to push. We just have to do this thing that we do better and better and better. And that's something that involves you, me, everybody who's listening to this, everybody who will listen to it over the next week, and people who've never even heard of it. We have to put some emphasis on this because, frankly, we don't have a lot of time. The changes that we're seeing on the spiritual scene are beautiful, but they're gradual and they're largely on the individual scale. And we're measuring this thing that's happening in little increments. But the changes that are happening socially and politically in the larger world that are counter to our efforts, those are not little things. The forces that would like to do very bad things to our folk, people who would like to change the world in ways that would make it difficult or impossible for us to assert ourselves, to express ourselves, to take any of our constitutional rights and hold to them tight. All of these things are, as we were talking about gun laws and stuff last week, any and all of these things, they're getting worse. So we need a spiritual awakening, a spiritual awakening that will trigger cultural changes, that will trigger the political changes, that will rescue our folk. That's where we're at. That's what we're coming from. Now, I've got a lot of things to say on that, and I've got my notes here because this was kind of impinges on the subject I talked about up at that conference. And so I'm going to share some of the material that I used for that as well. And I don't think you'll find it dull, and I don't think you'll find it, hopefully, anything other than motivating, because we all, myself included, need to be doing that. Okay, Jung. Let's talk about this Jung guy. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, gave us some clues to what's going on that we're seeing now. This is the same manifestation, or the same kind of manifestation, that he talks about in regards to Germany at the beginning of the 1900s and around in there, and leading on up for several decades after that. What we're seeing now is very similar to that, and that's, one, kind of scary, but two, very encouraging. That means the awakening is starting to happen. He gives us clues about all of this. He actually tells us how to produce this effect. So it wasn't his point, of course, and not like he set out to do that. But Jung actually tells us, in effect, how to produce these changes, how to accomplish our mission, how to awaken our folk. None of us, obviously, but his writings, and especially that essay, Wotan, are of great use to us. If you haven't read that essay, please do so. You can find it over on Wotan Network Update on Facebook and on several of my other accounts. And you can search it out anyway, but I've actually got a link to it there now. So, all right. So why should we care about Jung? Why should we be interested in his theories? And the answer to that is he's got tools to hand us, and we need to have the intelligence and the foresight to use those tools. A quick review of some of his main points, just to give you some framework here. First of all, Jung believed that the gods are powerful psychic forces in the collective unconscious. Some would call it the folk soul of any ethnic, racial, national group. My personal experience, and probably yours as well, is that the gods are much more than that. The gods are actual, well, gods, duh, but Jung wasn't there yet. It's my understanding he got there before the end of his life. I see that the archetypes are just two-dimensional flat representations of a multi-dimensional reality, that is the gods. And Jung talks about archetypes. These are images, specific images in the collective unconscious, i.e. the gods. And Wotan, of course, is one of them. Jung used the idea of the psychic force version of the god Wotan to explain the awakening of the Germanic people over the course of the first half of the 20th century. And as I said before, very importantly, he shows us how to repeat this. He gives us the formula so that this time we can bring it to a successful conclusion. So, an introduction to the essay Wotan. Carl Gustav Jung's seminal essay Wotan describes the spiritual and social ferment leading up to and including the rise of National Socialism in Germany. To the great psychologist, this movement was an expression of the ancient deity Wotan, whom the Scandinavians were to call Odin. Unlike those of us who actually follow the old gods, however, Jung saw them as not as self-aware and autonomous realities, but merely powerful psychic forces, symbolic, you might say, lying hidden in the collective unconscious of a group. Though Jung's way of looking at the gods is not ours, he can tell us much about the way that the holy powers work in the world and how we can change the world by bringing the might of the gods into Midgard, into the realm of human beings. In short, the essay Wotan tells us how a folk can be awakened, stirred into action, and made powerful. He also shows us pitfalls we must avoid if our enterprise is not to end in disaster. So, under what conditions has Wotan manifested in the past? Let's take a look at the history books. And as I speak, understand that when I use the word archetype, I'm using Jung's word, not mine. For me, Wotan is Wotan. I want to successfully communicate in his ideas, in his language, so to speak. Jung believed that certain conditions have to prevail before the archetypes, like Wotan, would emerge as factors in the direction of a society. Here are some of the specific things he has to say about the world that he, Jung, lived in. Quote, "We are living in times of great disruption. Political passions are aflame. Internal upheavals have brought nations to the brink of chaos, and the very foundations of our Weltanschauung, our worldview, are shattered." Elsewhere, he wrote that Wotan, quote, "appeared again when the Christian God proved too weak to save Christendom from fratricidal slaughter during World War I. Later in his manuscript, he commented that the archetype makes itself known where there is a new situation in which a new orientation and adaptation is needed. If this question is not clearly understood and no proper answer given, the archetype which expresses this situation steps in. In other words, as we would say, Wotan intervenes when his folk are faced with a terrible crisis, when turmoil reigns, and none of the old answers are working. His manifestation may be compared to an earthquake. Pressure builds along a fault line over a long period of time. Tension is released in one cataclysmic event that often leaves the landscape changed. Certainly, this sort of social stress was true of the period of the Germanic revival, the stresses of modernization, urbanization, loss of ethnic identity, and the collapse of traditional culture. In other words, pretty much the same situation in which we find ourselves today. That sounds like a laundry list of the complaints that people like you and I would have in regard to the current culture. And that is exactly what they were experiencing in Germany during that period. That was the trigger. That's what triggered the, quote, archetype. That is what will bring Wotan in to influence, to empower us, to breathe his furious might and wisdom into us so that we can solve these problems. The daily news is a constant confirmation of these conclusions. Aside from social crisis, there is another requirement for an archetype or for the god to manifest. There must be a mass movement. As Jung puts it, political events move from one impasse to the next like a torrent caught in gullies, creeks, and marshes. All human control comes to an end when the individual is caught in a mass movement. Then the archetypes begin to function, as happens also in the lives of individuals when they are confronted with situations that cannot be dealt with in any of the familiar ways. So again, he's explaining it in psychological and psychoanalytical terms. The synergistic effect, and this is an important sentence, the synergistic effect of many people thinking a certain way and doing certain things creates a cascade of mutual reinforcement that triggers the appearance of, he says, archetype, we say Wotan. The synergistic effect of many people thinking and acting in a certain way. The collective unconscious, the folk soul, speaks and invokes the might of Wotan. As you know, most of you know, I have something called the Wotan Network. Some of you have heard of it. Most of you probably at least heard of it. A few of you are involved with it. I want the Wotan Network to help in giving birth to that mass movement. Now, I have no illusions that the Wotan Network is going to be that mass movement. But again, we can get people, a large number of people, thinking and acting in certain ways. And thus, we can trigger the awakening. We can invoke the might of Wotan into our folk, into our own hearts first, and from there into the hearts and the minds and the souls of the people next to us, and from there to the larger culture. We can make a difference. Can we do it by ourselves? That would be hubris to think that we could. But we can play an important part. You and I and the people you know and the people I know. This is not beyond us. We have this capability and we need to exert it. So, for those of you who don't know, here's some more background on the Wotan Network. As I wrote in my notes, as I wrote in my talk, up the coast a couple of days ago, I said, we at the Wotan expect Wotan to pull some miracle out of his hat to save us from our laziness, weakness, and Weimar Republic style degeneracy. Why should he cater to our faults? What we ask instead is that he breathe his furious fire of holy inspiration into us, reminding us of what it means to be strong, honorable, and dutiful, so that we will rise up, iron in our backbones, and defend ourselves from those people and forces that would push us toward extinction. Wotan does not give free handouts, but he reminds us that we are his sons and daughters. How is the Wotan Network organized? The answer is minimally. It is a network, not a corporation. It is made up of nodes, namely people, volunteers who work together to conduct psychological and spiritual warfare, to aid various projects, and to influence events as needed to carry out our mission. It is flexible with minimal hierarchy. It is an open source insurgency, so to speak, a fog rather than a rock, but a fog that can solidify into a rock where necessary before the dissolving back into the fog. It is everywhere and nowhere. The Votan network began by creating and disseminating memes and online propaganda in general, but always within the parameters of a particular plan, and it continues so. It has since into ritual acts having spiritual, psychological, metapolitical, and political aspects. Our main such activity is Votan on the Peaks, where Votan network creators and activists climb mountains and perform rites to Votan atop them, then share the experience on social media. People doing things and thinking the same way and sharing ideas. That is how this synergy happens. This is how we create something larger than what we have now. This is how we touch the folk soul. This is how we invoke Votan's mind. Votan on the Peaks, of course, takes its name from the title of Julius Evola's famous book, Meditations on the Peaks. This is quickly going to morph into a more participatory phase with members in the network acting on their own and sharing the results with thousands of others. Our goal is to change the spiritual, psychological, and cultural patterns that have kept Eurofolk defenseless. This, in turn, will remake the political landscape and change the course of history. We will awaken Votan in all his fury, but we will balance that fury with wisdom and paradoxically with love and service to the principle of expanding life in the cosmos. Votan mit uns is our battle cry. The existence of our people is not negotiable, is our imperative. And the Wolf's Angle, a sign of the revolt of Germanic folk against oppression since the peasant revolt of the 15th century, and actually before, is our mark. So, what exactly are the goals, aside from this general sort of thing? What are the goals? What do we hope to accomplish? I've broken those down into 3 categories: awakening, self-determination, and permanence. When people ask me what the Votan network is trying to accomplish, I just tell them the truth. We want Votan to fill us with might and wisdom so that our people may survive and thrive. But what do these things mean in the real world? What will the result look like? How will it impact us? My answer to these questions falls under those 3 headings that I said just a moment ago. It comes down to awakening, it comes down to self-determination, and it comes down to permanence. Here is an approximation of what we collectively could accomplish. The how, that will be determined as things develop. Let's take the first one. Awakening means educating enough of our folk to make fundamental change. We don't have to red pill each and every one of our folk kin. Some of our people are so hopelessly indoctrinated and they will fight us to the bitter end. But we do need the active support, or lacking that, at least the neutrality of enough people to allow us to carry the day. Enough people so that on the basis, the framework, the seed that we plant, from that must arise a larger movement that will be able to transform our situation in every regard. Once we are awakened, we can heal ourselves and love ourselves. We will understand that we are bound by blood and history of our folk, regardless of where on earth they live. We will identify with our past and on that future which we shall build. We have made these inner spiritual changes. We can then make exterior cultural and political changes. Identity will become as respectable for us as for any other group. Our self-hatred will evaporate. We will secure our traditional homelands forever. We will reject the ongoing replacement of our folk. All of this leads to the second major aim of Votann Network, namely self-determination. This is the logical result of awakening. We must have control over our fate. No other group or outside force can be allowed to dominate us or to impose conditions on us. This does not mean hostility toward other groups, and we gladly recognize their own rights of self-determination. We will cooperate with them on matters of mutual interest, but we will never be physically or psychologically coerced into doing so. Third, permanence means ensuring the existence of our people down through the centuries and the millennia. This requires specific mental and spiritual qualities, idealism, commitment, and a sense of transgenerational identity strong enough to brave the ages. We also will need more tangible assets, the most important being irrefutable dominance in our traditional homelands. This is our native soil, the soil from which our ancestors sprang. It is holy soil, and we must be secure in those places. In time, we will need to expand off our Mother Earth into the cosmos to ensure our permanence. We would eventually do this anyway because we are incurable explorers. We are indeed a spacefaring folk. It is imperative that we guard against extinction from collapsing environment, nuclear annihilation, a major asteroid strike, or other threats on a global level. So that's permanence. But now I want to talk about another word we don't use enough. A huge concept, destiny. After all, the name of this program is God's Folk and Destiny. We don't talk much about destiny, but we should. The broad aims of awakening, self-determination, and permanence all lead to this noble ideal. We shy away from talking about destiny because it's just too big, and people will think that we're presumptuous or too ambitious or just crazy to be thinking about getting so involved with something on this scale. But this is unfortunate. It is all too easy for us to get so involved in the smaller day-to-day battles that we have to fight in the social and political and the spiritual arena. Of course, those battles matter, but they matter mostly because cumulatively they affect our grand destiny, the big picture. Yes, we must deal with 1,000 problems of our day so that from the perspective of destiny, we can forge a future lasting 10,000 years. Where all of this will take us, either you or I can say. My own vision of it is this. Centuries from now, my descendants will gaze up at a starry sky, point to twinkling points of light in the vastness of space, and tell their children, we are there, and there, and there. Look up at Orion's belt and the Great Bear, or the swath of stars that is the Milky Way, and know that men and women of our folk are looking back at you. Can you commit? Can you commit to a destiny like this? I am utterly, utterly committed to this destiny. I need your help. I invite you to work, to suffer, to battle alongside me, and ultimately to win, that we and those who follow us may attain this high ideal. to get involved with Votan Network, find Votan Network Update on Facebook while you still can, and visit our website, VotanNetworkBlogspot.com. Now migrating to www.votan-network.com/blog, or contact me on Wolf Age Media. You know where to find me. Votan mit uns. We can do this. We can awaken our folk. We are relatively tiny, but we have passion, and we have love, and we have dedication. We are the spark that can spread into something so much bigger. We just have to get out of our boundaries, get out of those little ordinary lives that we're leading right now, and do it. Dave, that's what I've got to say, bud.
Oh, man. Vintage McNallen tonight, man. Oh, wow. That's good stuff. I think I'm getting a little bit of an echo back on your end. Can you hear it?
Say again.
Check one, check two. All right, now we're good. Now we're good.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh man, you covered so many good points tonight, man. It was went from Jung to political aims to all this stuff, man. This is all good stuff. I'm a big fan of Carl Jung as well. I do. Here's the thing with Carl Jung is he's absolutely really fascinating, and he has a lot of really good insight. And the man was one of the most brilliant men to ever walk the earth. But I think a lot of people need to be careful and look at Carl Jung for what he was. And some people really uphold him as like a spiritual source. Keep in mind, he's a secondary source. He's not a main source to draw your spiritual philosophy from. But that doesn't mean don't read him. Absolutely read him, because he's fascinating, brilliant man. And a lot of this stuff that he talks about actually translates. It's really fascinating because a lot of the stuff that he talks about, a lot of his theories actually translate into theological truths, stuff that we already knew. It's pretty crazy.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was looking at some of the same phenomena that we look at, but he was putting a different label on it. At least back when he wrote the Votan essay. Now, the word I get on the street, for what it's worth, and I have no idea if it's true or not, is that later on in his life, Votan changed his minds about some of that and began to consider what he had been calling archetypes, began considering them as actual gods.
Yeah.
Which is certainly an encouraging development if that's true. I mean, the gods aren't archetypes. I mean, they're gods.
Yeah.
And in fact, we talked last week quite a lot about our relationship with the gods and summoning the gods and bringing the gods into our life without trying to explain them as archetypes or as anything else. But the word is from Miguel Serrano, esotericist down in South America, that on Jung's last visit to him, and Jung made a number of visits to him, on his last visit, according to Serrano, Jung had changed his mind about that and was looking at the gods in a different light. Whether he would be able to say that professionally or not, I have no idea. That might be something else. But speaking of that summoning of the gods, I referred briefly to this book, Summoning the Gods by Colin Cleary. The first couple of chapters of this pertain exactly to the sorts of things we were talking about last week, which is letting the gods speak for themselves as to what they are. Don't say, "Oh, the gods are archetypes," or "Oh, the gods are, I don't know, thought forms." Pull out something else out of the occult vocabulary. No, the gods are gods, and figuring out what that exactly means. Well, that's a lifelong endeavor.
Exactly. And speaking of guys that were of the esoteric practices, even Mr. Julius Evola later on in his works got more into being a strict theist. I can't recall which book exactly, but there's a passage in one of his books where he goes on. If you read his early stuff, he talks very much in these kind of like really abstract terms about the metaphysical and metaphysical planes. He's always been into there always must be a higher ideal. There must be a hierarchy. We must believe man should look to the heavens for his morality and like all that good stuff. But later on, he gets really hardcore about it, and he says something along the lines of, how can you look at the statues in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the statues and the effigies built in the north, and look at all of these things, and if you look at these representations and you think they don't represent an actual metaphysical being, then you are ridiculous. He says it's ridiculous to think that that they're not real gods.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it when men of his caliber and Jung's caliber can actually learn from their experiences and mature over time. I think we all should be open to that. I know that my thoughts on loads of things have changed tremendously over the half century or so that I've been doing this. I was so naive when I started. I was very young. I was 20-ish, 21, maybe, something like that. And I'm not knocking anybody who's that age. Wouldn't mind trying that again. But it is a learning experience. And my idea about the gods was so naive at the beginning. My idea about who I was so naive at the beginning. I was going to be this. I was going to, get in the army and go special forces and, go fight commies. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's great to fight communists. I mean, I can't think of any people better to fight. I mean, I'm all for that. Absolutely. But I was naive about the politics of the day. I was naive about the way things work. It took a long time. It's the same with people's perspective on the gods, that matures over time. And that's a good thing. We need to be open to that kind of a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, speaking of maturity, your take on, I guess you could say, accelerationism, I believe was a very, very wise take, very, very wise insight on that. That there are certain people, there are certain ideologies that are inherent, that are not authentic, that are not representative of what our folk, our people have believed for all these thousands of years, which is order, hierarchy, virtue, goodness, truth, like all of these wonderful things that made every civilization we've ever built the greatest in the world, the greatest throughout time. There's people that have ideologies that are the antithesis of that, where they believe that they are here to sow chaos, that they are the enemies of the gods, that there's no such thing as morality. And these people are predatory, and a lot of times these people preach this like hyper accelerationism kind of stuff. And I'm gonna make people mad in the chat, but I'm not saying Mr. McNallen believes this. This is Dave talking. Here's the bottom line. This is the way that I see it. I am a man of faith. I'm a man that serves his people, and I do it to the best of my ability, and I believe that in my heart. If you are somebody that believes in hurting children, that believes in hurting people, if you believe in this predatory ideology, then I got nothing for you.
Dave, I'm with you on that. And again, I know there'll be flack in the chat, but that's okay. And I understand the frustration that people are undergoing. Believe me, I understand it because I've lived with that frustration for decades and decades, watching this develop slowly the way it's developing. I hate the existing situation as much as anybody in the chat, and I am just as sick of it as anybody who's listening to this. But you got to have a workable solution, and I don't think it lies in accelerationism. It's the chaos. Say it was the whole Civil War thing. I think we've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating that a civil war would be disastrous in this country.
Yeah,
and it's meaning no insult or no offense to anybody who holds contrary opinions, but the realities of a battlefield, especially in that kind of war, is a lot uglier than anyone can conceive of who hasn't seen some of it. It's not a good thing. It's a horrible thing. It's a very painful thing. Don't get me wrong. If there was no other way, if it was fight or die, if it was that simple, well, duh, of course we're going to fight. But I don't think that's where it's at. We don't have a mass movement don't have the spiritual awakening, the philosophical awakening that would lead to a mass movement. That's what we have to put into place. We can't do it with this so-called, and definitely so-called, movement that passes for this thing of ours in general. Furthermore, major chaos in the United States would leave China an opportunity for global hegemony.
Oh yeah.
We don't want a world ruled by the Chinese. Talk about the end of our folk. Talk about the end of our greatness. Talk about the end of our sovereignty. That's it. You know, there was a senator in ancient Rome who used to conclude every speech of his, regardless of the topic matter, with the statement cogito ergo no. Shit. Carthago delenda est, and therefore Carthage must be destroyed. Didn't like Carthage. Well, I'm kind of that way about China. You know, I closed off area. We're talking about archetypes, and Steve is talking about what can we do to keep China from becoming dominant on the planet. Well, there's a lot of things actually, and mostly we need to get our stuff together, like we're trying to do. But yeah.
I understand the frustration too, completely. I'm a traditional guy. When I see this really gross, grotesque moral depravity that goes on in the mainstream, in the news, on TV, just like basic cable now is disgusting. Like it's like borderline softcore porn. Like really, just it's the worst stuff. Stuff when I was a kid in the 90s there would have been outrage if that was aired. That's being shown to children now. So I completely get the frustration, 100%. I get it. But to fix it is more than just, you know, speeding things up to implode and destroy itself. You have to at least try the proper solution first. You know, if there's, like Mr. Steve said, if there's nothing else, hell yeah, let's roll. But if there's even the slightest option of rebuilding and doing it the right way, we have to do it as moral creatures. And I say to the people that are in favor of sowing chaos and destruction and all this stuff, do you really want to sow chaos and destruction because you love your people? Do you want to sow chaos and destruction because you want to protect your children? Do you want to sow chaos and destruction because you want to reinstate order for your folk? Do you want to heal your folk, or you want to sow chaos and destruction because you want revenge against a world that has rejected you? Do you want to sow chaos and destruction for yourself?
Right. And another point I'd make, chance, is that in the process of working, quote, within the system, unquote, by engaging in electoral politics, by using propaganda, by bringing people over to our side, by using propaganda that works, propaganda that is not based on edginess, but which is based on communication. I know you're probably tired of hearing it, guys. Revolution is the art of communication. And every time we influence somebody, every time we bring somebody over to our side, every time we turn the light on in somebody's head and they go, oh, holy crap, I get it now. Every time we do that, that's one more person who will be with us, whatever comes. Even if the worst scenario unfolds, that's one more person that will be with us. And we need every single person we can get. Again, we must ultimately build a mass movement. We must ultimately be that coherent, have our ducks in that kind of order, so that we can make things function. So that the might of our holy gods and our holy goddesses can move within us and awaken others, so that what we end up with is something that is noble and powerful, and that will preserve our folk. You know, awakening. Yeah, we've got to get that awakening. We've got to get that self-determination. We've got to get that permanence. All of those things, you know, those are not compromising things. So, you know, you can say that, you know, Steve is cucking or whatever, but look at my goals. Look at the end goals. That is not a cuck kind of set of goals. These are lofty goals. These are noble goals. These are goals we can attain and maintain our spiritual coherence, being true to the ways of our ancestors. The word Aryan means noble. Let's be noble.
Yeah. And we
Oh,
don't.
I said an A word, didn't I? Whoops.
Hey, but you did it in a linguistic context, so
Yeah.
YouTube that was an educational quote there. That wasn't anything else. But
Yeah.
What I see, I've been talking about the folk awakening for so long, Mr. Steve. I see it too, man. Like you're talking about, you're seeing these guys wearing hammers. Man, I saw a guy. I was just at the store yesterday, and I saw some guy had rune tattoos all up his arm. He didn't even look. He didn't look like he was a prison gang or like anything. He was just a guy pushing his kid, a guy with his baby pushing his kid, had runes going up his arm. I didn't get to see a necklace or anything like that, but I was like, that's incredible. I ran into a guy at the store a couple months ago, had a Mjolnir, and I stopped and talked to him, and we had a good 10-minute conversation. I gave him a hug and everything. It was cool. And I run into these people all the time. I get questions all the time. Man, this is the gods are awakening. The gods have always been there. They've always been speaking to us. We just forgot how to listen, and we're remembering, and we're coming home, and we're healing, and we're seeing it in real time. So I can't believe anybody would want to get off of this script and get off of the playbook that has been in our hands, in our hearts, and our souls for all of these thousands of years. This is the secret sauce. This is the recipe. This is the antidote. This is what is going to heal us, and we're seeing it in real time. And I'm with it all the way. I'm done with everything else. I want our folk coming home, man. I want a better future for my kids, and I know for a fact that the gods are looking after us, and they're ready to help us achieve victory.
Yeah, if we can take care of the spiritual end of it, the rest will take care of itself. And it's not like I'm out there to bash on Christians. I'm not at all. I mean, my mother and father were Christians.
Yeah.
Everybody I knew and loved as I grew up were Christians. So I'm not a Christian hater. They can stay Christians forever if they want to. I don't care. But what they need to do with us is to get that awareness of the importance of our folk and the need for this kind of a society, this kind of a culture, this kind of a worldview that allows our folk to exist with honor, with pride, with coherence, and to work out that big D word, which today is not Dallas, but destiny. Actually, Dallas was in pretty bad shape last time I was there. The opposition forces are pretty much in charge, but me and some other Texans will see what we can do about that.
What are you talking? What's going on down there? They get hit by another hurricane or something?
No. It's just I'm involved in spiritual endeavors regarding Texas because that's my Heimatland. It's just the place of my birth. It's my home. I live in California, but I'm a Texan. I'll always be a Texan. No matter, I could be on freaking Alpha Centauri and I'd be a Texan. But it is, of course, a political and cultural battlefield right now because of the changing demographics. But, some of us are working in our own way, spiritually, politically, religiously, whatever we can to influence things. And I invite all my Texas brothers and sisters out there who are listening to this to drop a line. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, brother. Is there anything there in the chat we need to pay attention to? Any questions? Any of our folk out there need to?
I'm checking for some Q&A. If you have some Q&A, please drop it in the chat, and I'll read it off for Mr. Steve.
Yeah, we'll take a few more minutes here. I don't want to spend too long. About 5-10 minutes. See what we got.
Thomas Pierce says, "Shout out to Texas." Got some Texans in the chat.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're from Texas, tell us what town you're from.
Nice try, FBI.
Okay, roger that. Disregard the above. My bad. Yeah. First time I've been called FBI.
Yeah. Someone wants to know.
right?
I'm sorry, what's that?
I said, after all, I'm a well-known hater, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? The SPLC or the ADL has been after you, Mr. Steve?
Oh well, yeah, SPLC mostly,
Oh, yeah. Well, they're jerks.
and the various little vermin that kind of promote all of that stuff, but
Oh,
tell
yeah.
lies. People that tell lies mostly.
Allfar asks, what is your email address, Stephen?
Wolf Age Media, all run together. wolfagemedia@gmail.com. And that if you get a hold of me there, I can give you any kind of links or anything you need or whatever.
Yeah. And also, you could get an autographed copy of Austro, a Native European Spirituality, right?
That's where you can get it. You bet.
All right.
Yep. Yep.
Looks like you triggered some Texas talk. All the Texans started talking about how much they love Texas.
Oh, hell yeah.
All right.
Hey.
Huntsville, he says.
Okay, that's down Houston way. Long ways from me. I was born and raised in a little town of Breckenridge, way up about 100 miles this side of Fort Worth.
Oh, Roy Danton asks, the AFA website is very hard to read due to that background, although it looks really beautiful. Do you have any plans for updating that?
Well, I'm not in charge of that. I think that there are a number of people who've commented on that, and drop a line to whoever there and say, hey, please change this.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, how many times has the magnetic poles flipped on Earth? What are we, Bill Nye the Science Guy over here?
I have no freaking idea. Okay, I give up.
I don't know either. I know it's flipped quite a few times, and I know there's, speaking of our lore and everything like that, there's a lot of people that really, and I've become part of this camp as well, that believe, those of us that are really deep into cyclical time and understanding this stuff, believe that Ragnarok is the deluge, and that happens when the poles flip. And that some of us are kind of, into the crazy theories and believe that there's pyramids in Antarctica and Hyperborea and Agartha and all that stuff too.
Well, and Antarctic bases and other cool things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, I was in Neuschwabenland. That's right. And I was just catching up on a dig that happened not in Antarctica, but in the northern pole, in the Arctic. They found a mammoth a while back. They found this mammoth that was flash frozen, had all of its fur, everything. And when they pulled it out and they opened it up, it had semi-undigested vegetation, like plant matter in its digestive tract. When they looked at the plant matter, it turns out that this plant matter was semi-tropical. This was a mammoth that was in the Arctic. This is evidence that at some point, because he couldn't have just ate some stuff in the tropics, left it undigested for thousands of miles. He just ate that and it got frozen. So that is proof that there was one point that there was semi-tropical or temperate climates in the Arctic Pole. That's pretty cool.
I completely respect science. I love science, respect science. I think scientists, over time, give them enough time, they get most things right. But I think that the history of life on this earth and human life on this earth, and things like civilizations that have come and gone, ancient cosmic wars. There's a lot of stuff there we don't know about, and where we came from, where we're headed. Well, we don't really know a lot of those things. I know what the standard answers are, and I'm not dissing science, but I think that there are anomalies that I sure as heck don't have an answer to.
All right, we have another question from Red Moon. Dave Martell, how much knowledge on Asatru should you have before trying to join the AFA? What do you think, Mr. Steve?
Oh, you don't have to have a lot. When I came in the way of the gods, I knew very little indeed. I would say go ahead and look at the AFA's material. If, that hard to read website maybe, and some of the things that there are links to it. Check it out, and you can get kind of a quick introduction. I mean, it's not rocket science really. Actually, I kind of like rocket science too, but that's a discussion for the day. Basically, it's just anybody who understands that we have our native religion and that we only rightly want to practice and adhere to that native religion because it's ours. It expresses our soul and who and what we are. If you've got that much now, you're 90% of the way there. And, the details, you don't feel like you got to know all the myths and have read Snorri or whoever and whatever, all of that. Don't worry about that at this stage. Get some idea, just a brief idea of the context and the framework of it. And if you understand and agree with the values that are expressed in the AFA, then bam, by all means, contact them. Contact the AFA.
Yeah, just get out with your folk, man. When I went to my first gathering, I mean, it wasn't an AFA gathering, but my very first gathering, I didn't know anything. I read the Havamal. And I read some descriptions of the gods, and I was like, let's roll. And I just went out to meet people, and it was a wonderful experience. So it's you don't have to – if you know what Asatru is and you feel it in your heart and you want to learn more, just go. Just go. Do it. Experience it in real life. Life.
It is about the experience, and it is about being with other people. I mean, obviously, anybody could be a solitary practitioner. I get that. But believe me, you need the support. This is a folk, and folk just can't exist solely online. You've got to meet real people and shake real hands and have a meal with people, laugh with people, get together with people, meet their kids, introduce your kids, share food, share laughter, share ritual, and then it's a whole different world. Being an isolated individual just is not the answer on this. This is a folk religion, and it shouldn't just be an abstraction. It should be something where you are immersed in. I mean, you still got your individuality. Obviously, I'm big on that, but you are in a network, with a group of people that feel the same way that you do about the world in general. That's a great thing, especially these days.
Yeah. I've my kindred's been together for it's going to be 7 years, I believe, this Yule, and that's a pretty good run. Where I mean, there's kindreds out there been together forever, but for being a guy that's 32 and me and my wife and our kid, it's a pretty good run. And let me tell you, it's been one of the most wonderful things. I love my kinsmen with all my heart. They're my family. They've become my family, and it's the most fulfilling thing that I've ever done. Is start my kindred and having us all get together for Yule. All the kids play. We have a big old dinner. Make way too much food every single time. People get we have a couple drinks and we get a little goofy. It's wonderful and wholesome. It's like those old Christmas movies where you see like all the family get together. It's that same stuff.
Yeah. I watch all those old Christmas movies. You bet, man. I'm a sentimentalist about that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah. I love them. We got a couple more. If you want to answer them or you want to shut it down.
Let's give them quick answers and then we'll shut it down.
Wonderful. Here, let me find. I just lost them. Oh yeah, somebody asked about the Folk Builder or Kindred's AFA guys in North Carolina.
If my wife were in the room, she could tell that to you just right off the top of her head.
Oh well, she's in the chat. Yeah.
She's probably downstairs participating, but yeah, that would be her.
All right.
She's on it.
Here's one. What are your thoughts on the world of the Neurona Society? Any comments on the Asatru Edda and Odinist Edda books they've released?
Wow, that's a big subject. I don't know. Personally, I'm just I'm just not there. I'm not convinced that's the way to go. That's not a definitive statement. It's just my feelings right now. Of course, I've been doing it one way for a long time. I think that anybody should be free to put their material together and to express it to others. I'm good with that, but I don't know. I'm just very satisfied with what I feel I've got. And in terms of things like say Christian influence in the lore, and sort of almost an anti-scholarly kind of approach that I do detect people who have talked to me about it. I think that's a mistake. I think scholarship is important. I don't feel that your modern scholars have some sort of an axe to grind against Asatru. I just don't. I mean, they're either they love the subject and want to kind of even have some sympathies with us, or they just treat it as an abstraction. They don't have like an emotional involvement. It's not like you've got hardcore Christian scholars, that are out there doing their thing. So I think we can trust scholarship. I think we should evaluate scholarship, and not every idea that is put forward by scholars will be valid, but a lot will, and it shouldn't be thrown out. And I'm not saying that the Norrena Society does that. I'm just saying that is a caution I would have. So anything else I can say would be just sitting and working with too little evidence. I respect everybody's effort to put out the things that work for them and resonate for them, but I'm kind of a traditionalist.
Have you gotten a chance to read the Asatru Edda? I know you said you picked it up, or
I've read at it, but I don't know. I'm not there yet.
What is it? The chronological order that you're not crazy about, or?
I don't see any need for an epic. I don't see any need to impose order on it, which I'm not convinced necessarily is an organic part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I do know that they have because since I'm part of Norrena Society, there's a very large string of logic and argument to why they believe that there needs to be a chronological order, especially in the teachings of Victor Rydberg. He puts forth that the myths are a chronological kind of thing, and I don't really think Mr. Mark his aim was to create like an epic, or some people accuse him of trying to make a Bible, which is, if you read the Asatru Edda, if you read it, you'd think it's a ridiculous claim, but I don't think his aim was to create like an epic or a Bible or anything like that. I think he wanted to complete the idea of all of the lore being in chronological order, and starting in the ages and working through all the ages and kind of having it organized and stuff like that. And I'll tell you what, it's also pretty convenient having it all in one book. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Steve, you want to shut it down for this evening?
Yeah. Let's do that thing, and I'll do my usual sign off. That's all for tonight, folks. Keep your powder dry, your cupboards full, your spouse happy, your children close, your data and your firearms out of the hands of the deep state, and love life in Midgard, for it is a wondrous gift. Good night.